video back at any point, you know, make any extra notes you'd like to, or just review anything you weren't quite sure of. If there's an assignment, just try to complete on time. If you do need to leave, that's absolutely fine. Just let me know in the chat or something that you've gone, especially if both of you go. I'll be talking to myself. Buddy up, so always ask for help if you're not sure, whether that's with another learner or one of the trainers or with your Tunde. You know, we're always here to answer your questions. Try and dedicate, it says here, an hour a day. That's a great amount of time, not too much, but just really dedicate that bit of time where you've no distractions. You're just dedicating that time to this. It says try to keep your questions to the end. That's normally applicable if there's more than 2 people, but because there's only a few of us on tonight, I genuinely don't mind if you want to unmute at any point and just ask a question. Okay, again, if you have any technical issues or anything like that, just holler, just shout up, and we'll sort through it, okay? So what are we going to look at today? We're going to talk about a little bit about Excel changing the formulas. So you can copy and paste them between cells on a spreadsheet, and we're going to talk about how Excel adapts, how it changes to sort of help you out when you start doing that. So you're going to use a spreadsheet from an earlier assignment to examine how Excel changes formulas. I'm going to talk about how it decides how to change those formulas, so you know when it's going to change it and when it's not going to. And there's some advantages, some disadvantages to each of those. So this is called absolute and relative references. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about absolute and relative references. So by the end of this session, you'll be able to understand those key concepts. Okay, so in session 1, we saw how we can write formulas in cells to calculate a value for a cell. And you also looked with Tony at how to apply a format to the data in the cell. So we're just going to revise this and just double check that we're all happy with that. So I'm going to move from my presentation now into this. So you guys have this already. This is your first assignment that you completed. And I've just got one here, probably without the same with the same information, but I've not done the work on it that you have. So we're going to format these prices into currency so that we know what currency they're in. So can you remember how to do that? So unmute yourselves and shout up if you can remember, how do I change these prices into a currency? Can anyone remember? It's absolutely fine if you can't remember. Okay, so we're going to use this top button here. Go on.
If you want to go on general and click on the drop down button,
yep,
it gives a list of different items. So currency is one of them.
Perfect. Absolutely brilliant. Yeah. So click my cell, general, drop down, and currency. Absolutely spot on there. If I want to do it all at once, just highlight C like that by pressing C. And in there, absolutely spot on. Yeah, fantastic. So I've added a new column here as well. So you can see in column D, I've put quantity in D1, and I've just popped some random values underneath that. So each product has a value that I've got on hand. So if you want to do that with yours, you can use the same numbers I have if you want, or you can put some random values in, but just type in whatever you want in these columns. It might be easier if you use the same numbers that I have, just so that your formulas match up when we start looking at it. And we're going to calculate the value of the stock in the store. So this is my store. This is what I've got. I know how much it costs each. That's my price column in C. I know how many I've got, which is my column D. What I want to know is the value of that stock. So I've made myself a new column in E and I've put value at the top. And I'm going to put in a formula for the first row of data. So I could use a calculator to work that out, but I know that Excel does that for me. So I'm going to type in equals, so that I'm making my formula. I want to click on the cell. I want to put in an asterisk, which is Shift and 8, which is effectively a times by button. Oh, And I'm going to press entirely the wrong button. Excuse me. Let's try that again, shall we? So I'm going to type that one. I'll put my star in. And then I'm going to pop that in. One thing that's interesting to know, if you're looking at that E2 cell, you can see that as I click different cells, so C2 and D2, they've highlighted with different colored boxes. And if you look at the formula that I've written, you can see the cell references are the same color. So that's a great one. On a table like this, it's quite easy to tell because we don't have much data, but you can imagine if you've got sheets and sheets and quite a lot, just having that little visual reference there of this is what you've clicked and then this is what you've clicked, it's just really helpful. And to calculate that, I'm just going to press enter. So using our calculator tool, we can check 2.44 times 8 is 1952. So that's calculated that out for me. So now I know the value of my beef burgers. What I want to do is work out the value of the rest of the products as well. So what I want to do here is put the same formula underneath. So if I wanted to work the same calculation out here, so I wanted to times 345 by 16, I'm going to open the formula. I'm going to click C3 and you can see it's gone blue. I'm going to use my asterisk and I'm going to click D3. You can see it's gone red and I'm going to press enter. So if I wanted to work out the same calculation for row number 4, what would my formula be? What would I need to click first? Can anyone have a guess? If I'm working out that same calculation for row number 4, what am I going to press first? Which cell am I going to select?
C4.
Perfect. C4. And then I'm going to multiply it by what?
D4.
D4. Oh my goodness, what am I like? Multiplied by D4. Absolutely perfect. But I've typed that in every single time. We don't need to. We can copy and paste like you can in any other Microsoft Office function. I can right click and I can copy, or I can Control and C. You see it's got moving dots around it now, so it's highlighted, and I can Control and V it down. So you can see there, look in the formula bar, I've got C5 times D5, which is exactly what we would expect. If I copy it down again and again. Okay, so if you look at that formula there, you've got C6 times D6 and you've got C7 times D7, which is exactly what we would predict. So what that's doing is that's Excel. When you copied that cell containing the formula, it's trying to help you by automatically adjusting those cell references in that formula. This is often because we want to repeat similar calculations. So in this instance, that value column, we wanted to do the same calculation 6 times, just using different figures. So Excel sort of interprets that. It sort of knows that that's what you want to do. So when you copy each of these down, it adjusts the formula based on what row you're in so that it's just a little bit more user friendly. It sort of expects what you're going to do. But it can be a little bit sometimes of a trap for the unwary. So what we need to do is we need to make sure, as we did, especially if we've not put this formula in together, just have a little look at it in the formula bar before you copy it. Just try and make sure whether it is going to adjust any references when you copy the formula. So to do that, you need to understand how Excel adjusts cell references when you copy that cell containing the formula. So we're going to look at another example to show you how it works out the changes in cell reference. So I'm just going to start a new page here. And I'm going to enter just a couple of values for us to have a look at. So just really simple. The numbers don't matter. It's more for the working out and the demonstration. So in here, we're going to type in V2 times G6. So you see there, oh, G6, you silly sausage, G2. I didn't even click, I just typed in because I use the cell references, so you can do that if you want. So that's made 12, which we would absolutely expect it to do because 6 times 2 is 12. If I then change this 2 here to a 4, it changes my answer there. Because what it's doing is using the value of whatever's in that cell reference times the value of whatever's in that cell reference. So if I change that back to 2, it's taking the 2 times 6 and changing it to 12. So let's have a little highlight of that one just so we can point it out. Okay, so again, I've clicked there and you can just see those 2 highlighted and the answer down at the bottom there, okay? Ooh. And that's that. So we're going to copy this C8 as we did before. And we're just going to move it across to F10 here. So you can see, strangely, that it's gone to 0 there. And that's because we've copied this formula here, E2 times G2, and I've moved across and down. So I've moved across 3 and down 2. So what it's done, what Excel's thought I want to do, is the same calculation, but using cells that are 3 across and 2 down. So effectively, if you click on that, it's used those 2 cells there. So because I've taken the formula from C8 and I've moved it across 3, it's taking the data from cells across 3 and across 3, and I've gone down 2 here, so it's gone down 2 there. So as this formula here used those 2 cells, and I've copied and pasted across and down, it's taken the reference for this formula from cells across and down. Again, does that make sense to everyone, how that's worked? So that's what's called a relative value. So that's where it's sort of known really what I want to do, as it did in our first example. It's known the calculation I want to work there. So it's helped me and adjusted my formula to help me out. And that's what it's done there. It's done a relative. So if we look at H4 and I put a value in H4, say 1, and then put a value in, it turned it to 5, because it knows it's referencing those 2 points because they're the same distance that this one was to this one. So this is what Excel's trying to do. It's trying to help you when you copy a formula containing a cell reference. It's looking at the cell that we're copying from and to, and working out the difference between the rows and columns of the cells. So if cell F10 is 3 columns to the right of cell C8, and cell F10 is 2 down from row cell C8. So we just need to examine this in a little bit more detail, so we know exactly sort of what's happening. So we're going to copy. Let's get rid of those there. Okay, so we're going to copy C8 to B10. So this is C8. We're going to Control and C, and we're going to pop it in B10 there, just using Control and V. So we've copied from C8 to B10. So we've moved one column to the left and 2 rows down. This means that Excel will adjust the cell references in the formula by subtracting 1 from the column letter. So it's gone from C to B, and adding 2 to the row number. So it's gone from 8 to 10. So it's worked out how many columns we've moved and in one direction, how many rows we've moved and in what direction. And then it looks at each cell reference in turn and decides how to change it. The first cell reference in the formula is E2. And if we move E2 one column to the left and 2 rows down, that becomes D4. And if the second cell reference is G2, and we move this cell reference one column to the left and 2 rows down, that becomes D4. And you can see in that formula bar that it has become D4. Okay. So is that sort of making sense there? Does that make sense how it adjusts automatically to sort of help you out a little bit? So that's what we call a relative value, a relative cell reference. But we might not necessarily want that to happen. We might want to use an absolute reference. So we can stop that from happening. We can make it so that the formula will always use E2 no matter where we put the formula. So we might want to do that. So it's easy to use an example in real life for this one. So I'm just going to start a new one here. And then we're just going to pop some data in here. So we're just going to pop Andy in there. So we're just going to have some data to work with here. And then this is going to be their weekly pay. So we'll put 5%. And then in there, I'm going to put B1. Sorry, bear with me. Okay, so if I say that Andy earns £100, you can see that C1 shows how much money, extra money, Andy's going to earn. So he's going to earn an extra £5 there if 5% is the increase. So I've got my staff to the left. I've got my increase at the top here, so they're going to have a little bonus of 5% this time. So if Andy normally earns £100, then in this column here in C2, I've used the formula 100 times 5% to calculate he's going to get an extra £5. So we want to look at this for all these employees. So if I say Blair earns £200, and I'm going to copy this down. Whoa, something's gone wrong there because Blair's suddenly getting £20,000 extra rather than the 5%. And that's because Excel's done what it did in the previous worksheet. It's adjusted the formula. So this was B2, B1. And as I've gone down one, Excel's taken the references as down one. So instead of going B1, B2, it's now B3, B2. So it's times B3 by B2, which has given me that crazy amount there. So this is where we want what's called an absolute reference, because what we don't want it to do, we don't want it to make that adjustment for me. What I want this formula to do is multiply whatever's in this box here. So in this case for Blair, it would be B2 times by B1 every time, even when I copy the formula. So I'm going to delete that formula for now. What I'm going to put in instead is equals, and I'll put a $ in there. I press my of course it's not worked. Oh, why is this having Epi now? We'll do it as that. I don't want it as a percentage. There we go. That's more like it. So we're going to put in equals. We're going to put in $. Oh my goodness. What am I doing wrong here? Okay. Sorry about that, technical issues. So we're going to go equals. I'm going to try this one. Then I'm going to put my times in there. Then I'm going to put my $. I am trying to formula. Oh, what is happening here? Because I need to type it in. So I'm going to type B, put my $sign in. I'm going to type 1. So you see it's taken that reference as B1. I'm going to hit enter. So that's given me 10 that time. So if I put Chidi in as 300 and I copy this formula down, it's given me 15, which is the correct amount. If I type in 500 for Doris and I copy the original formula, the relative references, you silly sausage, it's given me the wrong answer again. So I need to make sure I'm using that absolute reference there that you see in the formula bar has got the $signs. So if I copy that down now, it'll give Doris the correct amount. So if we say Econ's got 750 in here, to get this absolute reference to B1, I need to make sure I copy that one down there, which is that. Okay, so we're just going to try this again. So we're going to say, we're going to look at a menu in a coffee shop. Okay, we're going to put some prices in here. Change its currency so it makes a bit more sense. No, we'll just leave it, that's fine. Okay, so this is my prices as of August 18th. On August 19th, there's going to be a price rise of 50%. So I need to work out what my new menu prices are going to be. And remember, I want to use an absolute reference. The thing that's never going to change in this calculation is what's in F1, because I always want to times it by 50%. So how much are things increasing by? Well, let's have a little look. So I'm going to use the value from F2. I'm going to times that. Because I want an absolute reference, I'm going to put in my $sign. Then I'm going to put in F, then a $sign again, and then a 1. And I'm going to press enter. Copy it down. And then in here, I'll put the new price. And I'll press equals that. I'll put equals that one plus that one. So it's giving me £1.50. Copy that down. And that gives me my new prices. So that's the difference between relative, which was this one here, and absolute, which is this one here. If you don't want to change one of the cell references, you always want to multiply it, times it, add it to the same thing every single time. You're going to use absolute. If you want Excel to adjust and help you and change both cell references, you're going to use relative. And the difference between the two is putting that $sign in there. So you can put the dollar here. We've used it before the column reference and before the row reference. You can do it just one or the other if that's what makes sense for you. Okay, so we're just going to take a quick breather there while I have a quick look at the chat. Just see if there are any questions. Is that making sense as we've gone through that? Just pop any questions you've got in the chat. If it's making sense to you, just sort of press a yes. Or agree using the yes function. So we're just going to go through some slides that sort of summarize that in a little bit better than I would really. Okay, so we're just going to review that concept. Okay. So if you write a formula in C1 that says something like A1 times B1 using a relative reference to cells A1 and B1. This is because if you were to copy this formula to another cell, it would change the cell references relative to cell C1. So if we copied the formula from C1 to E3, we've moved 2 columns to the right and 2 rows down. So to help you, Excel would change the cell references A1 and B1 by also moving them 2 columns to the right and 2 rows down. If you write the formula in C1 like $A $1 times $B $1, you're using absolute references to cells A1 and B1. If you copy the formula then from C1 to any cell, it will not change the references A1 and B1. They'll remain A1 and B1 wherever you copy the formula. So absolute is it doesn't change. Relative, it changes relative to where you copy the formula to. Okay, so where you take it from, where you take it to. So a cell reference might have an absolute reference to the column and an absolute and a relative reference to the row. So this is what we talked about. So if we put in $C7 and you copied that formula containing the cell reference, the row number can change. So the 7 will adjust, but the C cannot. So that was like what we did in the second example with the price. Okay, so you copy a formula containing just $1, whatever that $sign is before is going to change. So in this $sign C7, it's going to change the C. It's going to change the 7, sorry. So the row will change. The column, the C, will not. Similarly, a cell reference may have an absolute reference to a row and a relative reference to the column. So C$7. And if you copied that, the cell reference, if you copied that formula containing this cell reference, the column letter can change. So the C can change, but the row number cannot. So it would always be 7. So what we want to do when we're thinking about cell references and formulas is we want to make sure that we reference them correctly so that when they're copied, Excel will change them correctly. In the example we used relatively sort of simple information and a very small amount of information. The more information you put into Excel, the more careful you need to be, because obviously it can get quite complex at times. So that's relative and absolute references, cell references. So the key to this one is thinking about where that $ goes. So it goes before what you don't want to change. So it goes before the letter if you want to keep the column the same, before the number if you want to keep the row the same, or if you want to keep them both the same, it goes in twice. So before the letter and before the number. Okay, so let's go back to our workbook and see what we've got going on. So we're going to have a look at working out that total pay rise. And we've just labeled it total just for simplicity's sake. So what we can put in here is we can put in a little formula to make a total. So we can do this, and we can go. So I want C2 plus C3 plus C4 plus C5 plus C6. Enter. Perfect. Easy. Nothing wrong with that. We've only got 5 bits of data there. If imagine you've got 20, 200 perhaps. We need to think about an easier way of doing that than individually typing every number. So let's look at that. So if we press enter, just as we did before, and we go C2. Now equals sum. I'm going to open a bracket. I'm going to pop in C2 there. And then I'm going to put in a colon. And then I'm going to put in C6. I'm going to close my brackets. And I'll press enter. So by putting in that colon, I've almost explained to Excel that I want to go from C2 to C6 and add in everything. So let's try it with this one. So in here, I'm going to put the total increase. And I'm going to say equals. And I'm going to use H2 plus H3 plus H4 plus H5 plus H6. Enter. So I've got £11 and a penny. In this one, silly sausage, I'm going to put in equals sum, open bracket. I'm going to go H2 colon. So from H2, my colon tells me I'm going to and including H6. And I'm going to close the bracket. And you can see if you look at column H, it's highlighted all those blue and it's highlighted in blue in the formula. I press enter and I get £11.01. So it does exactly the same thing. It's just a much shorter way of doing it. So you can see in this formula bar here for H7, I've typed everything in. In I7, I've simply done a sum of H2 to and including H6. So it's exactly the same. It's just a little bit simpler. If you're only doing 2 cells, it doesn't make any difference which one you do. But think if maybe at a time you might be doing 10, 15, as I say, maybe even 200 pieces of data. So it's just thinking about these little shortcuts that are really, really, really going to help you out. So a colon means a range of cells. There's also a great little tool. If I click and highlight these, if I don't want to necessarily put the total into my spreadsheet, I just want to know. If I look down at the bottom here, right at the bottom in the status bar, it's telling me the sum of my selected cells, it's telling me the count, and it's telling me the average. So this is doing that sum for me without me having to type the formula in. It's not existing anywhere in the spreadsheet. So if I wanted that information in the spreadsheet, I'd still have to use the formula. But if I just wanted a quick total, it's there. A quick count and an average of the selected cells. It saves me doing any work. It'll just put those three of anything that you highlight. So we here don't have very many pieces of data. We've only got 5. But if you can imagine a column going all the way down to, say, row 23, rather than individually counting them, you just highlight. So if your data went like this, excuse me. Okay, so sometimes you might have a few gaps in your data like that, so it makes it harder to count. But again, it gives you that count down there still, and it gives you that sum. So it's just a little, just knowing little bits like that is sometimes just those little shortcuts. They can just help you out a little bit. So that status bar right at the bottom is really, really useful if you just want a quick average or a quick total. So we did this one here, the total with a range of vertical. You can also do it with a range of horizontal. It works exactly the same. Just as with everything, make sure your references are correct. Okay, so if here we could do it horizontally if we wanted. Okay, so you can do it vertically or horizontally. Okay. One great thing about this as well is I've put in a few different formulas here. What I might do is do my calculations and then send this off to my manager. What they're able to do then by clicking on each cell is see exactly how I've come to the figures I've come to. So exactly how have I come to 0.5? How have I come to 0.75? Oh, well, I look in the formula, I can see she's taken F3, which is, and I've times it by this. So if anyone's ever unsure of how you've come to a decision, how you've come to a piece of data, they can always look back in that formula bar and see exactly how you've come to that decision effectively. So Excel's a really efficient way of storing an awful lot of data because it stores what you can see on the screen, it stores the figures, and it also stores how you've come to those figures. So how you've reached that decision of 0.735, obviously that'd have to be 74p, wouldn't it? Per example. But how have you reached that decision of 150? Well, it's told me I've used G2 and F2. How have I reached the decision of G2? Right, I've times that by a half. So you can store more data than you would think is there just by simply looking at the figures. Okay, so let's just have a quick recap of everything we've looked at today. It's one of those subjects that sometimes it's a bit tricky to sort of get in your mind because it's quite an abstract concept. But once you start practicing it and start making a few mistakes on purpose, just with like we have with really simple data there, and use the assignments that you've been given to practice on. So a relative cell, a relative reference is something like A1 times B1. And if I'm using something relative and I copy that formula, it's going to adjust the cell references in the same way that I've adjusted where the formula is. So if I copy the formula one row down, it's going to adjust the cell references by 1 row down, just like it did in that first example we used. So we put the formula C2 times D2 into E2, we copied it down, and it's adjusted there because it's adjusted the cell references. The opposite of that is the absolute reference. So if you typed in the formula $A, $1 times $B, $1, you're using absolute references to cells A1 and B1. So no matter where you copied that formula, Excel will never change the references. It will always reference A1 and B1. That's what that $sign is telling you. Okay, so that's the difference between relative and absolute. Okay, so got a couple of questions here. I do apologize that we're given 20 minutes ago, but can we total across a row, across a row instead of columns? You absolutely can, Kemi, yeah. So you would use just exactly the same thing as you did. So if I go back to share screen, share. So if I wanted, let's just put some random figures in here. Let's not use that one. Right, so you would just do exactly the same as you have done. So in there, you'd put equals sum, open bracket, and I go D9 to I9. Close my bracket, enter. So it's exactly the same way. It's just the cells you reference that make the difference. So equals sum, open bracket. You can also do it this way as well. You can click and drag and do it that way. So yeah, exactly the same process. So if we want to put total in there, we go equals sum, open bracket, click drag, close bracket, and enter. So yeah, whether you're doing it rows or columns, exactly the same. Just be careful what cells you reference, basically. No worries, Kemi. And then Semiat, how do we delete a blank page on Word? I'm loving how random that is, Semiat. It's open Word. We'll talk about it. So Microsoft Word is not my forte, but let's have a little go. So let's open a blank document on Word. Let's put something in there. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Let's make one more blank page. Right. You're testing me today. So let's zoom right out. Should be able to see my Word document here. So I've got writing on this one, blank, blank, writing. You want to know how to get rid of this blank. Simply click on it and backspace the cursor all the way up, and it'll just drag that right into the top. That's the way I do it. Okay, so that's your blank page there in the middle. So I've got my writing here. I've done all my writing here. I've done all my writing here. I've ended up with a big blank space in the middle. Click to the bottom of the page before it and just press delete. Your writing will then be at the bottom of the next page. So keep pressing delete. It'll delete any empty lines and drag that text all the way up. And that's the best way to do it. Okay, I don't know if that helped. I do like the randomness of the question though. Fabulous. If there's no other questions, we're going to call it an evening there, just because that's quite a good place to stop. Okay, so have a little practice with those things. Review the video if there's anything you're not sure of. Oh, no problem, Samia. And we'll leave it there for this evening, unless you've got any absolute burning questions for me, in which case I will answer them, of course. But if not, we will call it an evening, and I will see you next week. Okay, fab. Oh, you're absolutely welcome, guys. Not a problem at all. I'll see you again next week. Have a lovely week, whatever you get up to. And I'll see you soon. Bye, guys. Take care.